Hello, class. Welcome to week 3. Um, just a couple housekeeping things. There was an issue with going to our home screen here. There was an issue with the Genogram link not working, the worksheet, and I know you guys are working on your papers, so I've attached the worksheet to an announcement right here. So please take a look at that and correct it. I apologize that it wasn't working. A student recognized this, and Dr. Frederick, if you aren't aware who he is, he's one of the main people over in our department, and he's designed many of your courses. So he let me know about this worksheet not working. So I went ahead and corrected this and put it in the announcement section. We are on week 3. I've enjoyed so far reading your discussion boards. So much we can learn about communication, right? And how we communicate with one another in our family systems. I appreciate all of your openness and honesty and sharing and your feedback for one another. You're probably going to learn a lot in this program, not only about psychotherapy and being a great therapist, but also just a lot of things about yourself. So it's always probably really interesting. We're continuing on our journey right now, though, in talking about family therapy and different models. And we're going to be talking about some existential models. Um, and we're talking about experiential family therapy. And we're looking at Virginia Satir um, and how she was kind of the grandmother of such things. She has some really great techniques if you've gotten a chance to look over any of her work. So we'll be focusing in on some of these today. There's a lot to cover, so we won't get to everything, but I'm going to highlight some things just to kind of hopefully help you understand better. And so here I go. Okay, so with experiential an experiential model, we're going to be looking at how people are relating to each other on an emotional level. We're looking at their warmth, empathy. Um, we're going to be looking at the family's focus and how the therapist is connecting with them. That's obviously very important in this form of therapy. There's 5 different communication stances: congruent, placator, blamer, super, reasonable, and irrelevant. Stances will acknowledge or minimize the self, the other, and the context. So placator minimizes self, people-pleasing tendencies, needs less directive therapy methods. People in your family you probably could identify as being placators. There's blamer, which minimizes others, needs to increase awareness of others' thoughts and feelings, and direct confrontation often strengthens the therapeutic relationship. So this person is obviously plays a specific role. Then there's super reasonable, minimizes self and others. Logic and rules reign supreme. Therapist must refer to context to gain validity. And then irrelevant, minimizes self, others, and context. No consistent grounding in self, other, or context. Must increase ability to recognize thoughts and feelings of self and others. So each person in the family may play a different role in this. Like I mentioned, Satir is one of the main people in a name that you've probably heard more often than some of these other names. So the model, there's a model of change, which with all of these models, you're going to notice that, of course, you're going to want to see a change. We have the status quo, right? This is what would be considered the client's normal. The introduction of a foreign element, the chaos, the integration of new possibilities, the practice, and then the new status quo. So we want to change the old status quo to a new status quo. Therapist is involved through all these different stages. And the therapist's involvement is going to look different in each model, which again, when you're the therapist and you're getting to kind of decide how you want to practice, you're going to want to find models that feel very comfortable for you personally. So assumption of Satir's growth model. People naturally tend toward positive growth. All people possess the resources for positive growth. Everything impacts and is impacted by everything else, and therapy is a process involving interaction between the therapist and client. Each person is responsible for themselves. Now, some of you may have different opinions about this, right? People naturally tend toward positive growth. You know, you may not find that to be true. You might find that to really reign true in you, and you might think, yeah, that's really accurate. Whichever it is, that's okay. You can really like some of these concepts, you can really not. The main goal is when you're in the room and you're the therapist, you're going to need to find what works well for you. We're just telling you all this information because we need to, and you need to be well informed and educated on these things. But you are going to find the right fit for yourself. So the therapist is warm, right? Making contact with the clients, shows empathy, conveying hope, and shows themselves credible, right? So again, the system, the emotional role of the system, the symptom has a role in the family system, of course. Like so the example is a kid acting out may be due to trying to get attention off the parents where their marriage is falling apart. So if the child is the identified patient and is a big pain, that might be because the child is trying to get the parents to work together on dealing with them versus arguing all the time about each other. Now, this may not be done on a very conscious level. This can be done very subconsciously on the child's end, but you can see this is the symptom. The identified patient is the symptom, not the problem. Just like when from a medical standpoint, when someone has, let's say, I'm thinking a symptom due to a diabetic problem. If diabetes hasn't been diagnosed and if we're just treating the symptom, then you're going to have a greater problem. When we dive deeper and see that, let's say, the person has a diabetic issue or has full-blown diabetes, you need to address the diabetes, and in return, that will address the symptoms. Okay? So in families, they see it as there's power struggles, parental conflicts, lack of validation, and lack of intimacy, which we can see in problematic families. All those things can be true. Each family person plays a role. There's a martyr, a victim, a rescuer, a good child or parent, and a bad child or parent. So family life chronologically is something that is important. So a timeline, which I find timelines very helpful. One, because when clients are tracking their lives, sometimes it's hard to keep track because they're all over the place, and sometimes people really haven't connected their life event to their life. And there is a lot of power in recognizing and acknowledging some things that have taken place in a person's life. So I like a timeline for some of those reasons, but this is a way to identify things that have been going on in the family, job losses, marriages, moves, tragedies, all different births, deaths, all those kinds of things. And the therapist will give insight into those things. The survival triad, the child, mother, and father, and the relationship between them. A child learns how to be human in this triad, and the triad should serve as a nurturing system for the child. When the child is experiencing difficulty, the therapist considers how the nurturing function of these relationships can be improved. So how can we improve this triad is what the therapist is looking at. So the layers of the iceberg, right? So, and I think an iceberg is a really good metaphor to use in a lot of different contexts, just because even when we look at people, we only may see the very top of them, but there's so much more underneath. And this is what we're talking about. There's layers. So there's behavior, coping, feelings, perceptions, expectations, yearnings. Wanting to transform the client's feelings and help in order to make changes, right? We want change. We want a new status quo. Consider aspects of the self that the client values and aspects of which he or she is ashamed. So looking at what they really appreciate about themselves and what are areas of themselves that they want to be changed. This would require obviously some level of self-awareness, right? Um, because they have to be able to know these things about themselves. But this is something that is important for clients. Self-compassion, which a better indicator of happiness and self-esteem. So be able to love oneself, and I think that's why I like the word of self-worth better than self-esteem, because to me, self-esteem, it's about being better than, and I to me it's just like appreciate that you have value and purpose here on this planet. So looking at how they love themselves, and where their love is for themselves. Um, as this gets better in a client, more um, they're more graceful and gracious to other people and hopefully to themselves. And how our mind and body are connected. I believe that we're truly holistic beings and that we are super interconnected. Um, Emotional issues can manifest themselves in the body. We see this all the time with anxiety, right? Some people may not realize they're anxious, but they have the actual physical symptoms, right? Like they have heart racing, shortness of breath, they think they're having a heart attack, sometimes sweating, um, stomach issues, but they may not actually know verbally that they're anxious. Our minds and bodies are interconnected. And so, in this particular theory, they're addressing that. So, the way the body is used indicates a person's communication stance, right? Um, so, we see this even, we kind of talked about this in that discussion board where some of you talked about that nonverbal language. There's a way of communicating without communicating. Our faces show how we feel, how we sit, how we stand. We see this a lot in a therapeutic room on a couch based on how people sit down. If they sit close to each other, if they sit far away from each other, who sits by who, that indicates a lot of information. It sounds maybe kind of silly, but it's true. It does. It indicates a lot of information. Um, so a congruent communicator may be more relaxed. A placating may be more timid, maybe more hunched over, standoffish posture. A blaming person might be angry and stiff. A super reasonable person could be cold and distant. An irrelevant could be hyper and distracted. So interventions, right? Let's get to the nitty gritty. So again, we want to change family rules, communicating, sculpting, that's a fun activity. Touch um, is involved, obviously, appropriately. So these are some of the interventions. So family reconstruction. Um, so it can be, um, it's a way for the family to work together to come up with how to maybe fix unresolved issues. Um, so a lot of Virginia Satir used a lot of movement, um, acting, role playing in her interventions. One that I use all the time is sculpting. And I like sculpting because you have your clients be like clay. And you say, one of them is the artist. And I have them maybe describe with the clay how they would like the family to be or how they see things. And then I allow each person to have a turn doing so, and it's very eye-opening for people because usually they're very accurate in how they sculpt the current situation, but then the new situation is very inspiring for the family to see this is how we want to be. What is it going to take for us to get there? Great activity. And a lot of those kinds of activities are in here where it's interactive. Family therapy is not dull, let me tell you. Um, Family therapy is not dull. It's very interactive. It's very, it goes by very quickly in a session. A session runs by very fast. And there's a lot of ways to be interactive and this being useful and helpful in bettering not only the family, but in order to maybe identify issues, bring things to light, solve some problems, allow them to see themselves for who they are. It can be really a lot of fun, but also too very insightful. And so there's a lot of great activities in this form of therapy that bring everyone together and create, bonding, allow people to see themselves for who they are, things of that nature. Um, so, okay, this is symbolic and experiential and internal family systems. So this is chapter 9. Carl Whitaker is who we're talking about, okay? Um, so he looks at the battle for structure, right? It should be won by the therapist who sets boundaries and limits for therapy. Battle for initiative needs to be won by the client. Therapists should never work harder than their clients. And you can, it sounds strange, but you can sense when these kinds of things start to happen in a therapy session or with a specific client, where it's like I'm trying and I'm working and I'm doing, and the person is hardly doing what they need to do on their end. It can be very frustrating, and one that's not going to be useful for them outside of therapy. So, therapy of the absurd, that's just how this is known, um, employs specific form of absurdity for specific purpose. So the absurdity is used to perturb the system in a compassionate and caring way. And caring can mean speaking the truth, but the therapist conveys caring behind brutally honest comments. So the therapist's authentic use of self, the therapist is very authentic, doesn't follow professional pretenses or follow what is considered appropriate boundaries, but obviously would be legal and ethical, right? Um, Willingness to stand up for personal beliefs. Therapist responsibility pushes clients to accept full responsibility for their own lives. And stimulating mutual growth. The therapist and client grow together through authentic encounter, and there can be a use of a co-therapist to also challenge. So an authentic encounter relies on the in the moment, is in the moment, um, and it's a way to really directly experience someone. The therapist is focusing on the emotional system rather than behavior. And when they're sensing triangles, and that's when, two people are grouped together and one person's on the outside, they focus on the emotional exchanges that are happening between the people versus the behavior that's happening between them. So what is a trial of labor? It's how the therapist is responding, or how the family is responding to the therapist, to understand a person's preferred family roles, so values, development, history. Um, you're looking at the structure of the family and then their exchanges of emotion in the family. Assessing structural organization. So you're looking at the boundaries, and we've talked some of this even in structural family therapy, right? The boundaries, the flexibility, generational gaps, gender roles, all these kinds of things that are going on in the family. And then we're looking at how they're processing feelings. So how are they individuals? How are they handling conflict? How are they handling problem solving, loyalty? How are the parents? How are they playful? Can they have fun? Can they take a joke? Are there cultural pieces that we need to be aware of? And then, of course, we're going to then have to assess the families, really encouraging them, giving them abilities to change, resources to change. The family is viewed as being highly resilient and resourceful. Um, and the therapist is also giving them some resources. But if you see yourself as resilient, resourceful, then you see hope. If we don't have hope, then we don't see a lot of purpose in going on, which is problematic when we're trying to work through family things, right? We want change. Okay, so symptoms develop when dysfunctional structures and process persist over time. Healthy families experience periods of dysfunction but do not become chronic. So we can recognize the dysfunction, we want to change it. Persistence of dysfunction can occur over generations. Offspring feeling obligated to inherit a family myths and legacies or make up for prior losses. So we want to change that, right? So we want to set 3 long-term goals: increase the cohesion, increase the growth, and to increase the family symbolic world, okay? So we wanted to confuse and disorganize the family, okay? Get rid of rigid patterns, interactions. Sometimes we can do this with absurd comments, role reversal, which can be done with role play, um, and then appealing to universal principles at odds with family beliefs, so challenging some of their beliefs. Um, and the therapist might be using some of these things in session with them. Some of it might come out from assignments that they're given. But the therapist is really working in session to use maybe a comment or to challenge something that needs to be changed, and hopefully they'll be able to see it. Redefine symptoms as ineffective efforts. Use specific reframe or striving for growth and authenticity. A child's refusal to do homework as being maybe they're having a really hard time at this new school or within a new grade. It's now not just the child's problem, it's a bigger problem. It affects all of us. How do we address this now as a whole, not just it's that one person's fault, kind of bringing them together. Fun. We want to have fun in families, and sometimes even I get caught up in my own family in it because we get so caught up in things we need to get done and places we have to go and things we have to do and houses to clean and food to make that we forget to have fun and just be present, right? Like we can get all so caught up and not be spontaneous. And so play builds the therapeutic relationship. Playfulness helps reframe problems. And the use of humor and play often goes against common stereotypes about therapists and therapy, right? If I can have fun in therapy, this is great too when you're including kids in a family session. Like, I want to go back. I want to get better. I want to do what that person says because I trust them and I trust what they're saying and it's fun and they understand me. Like, how great of an experience would that be for a client and for a family? So separating interpersonal from personal distress. Okay, so people don't know how to allow personal autonomy while also being intimately connected with others. And we see this all the time in our culture with codependency. Our culture, I feel like, encourages codependency, especially with phones and social media and being on location with people. It's like you can't be your own person. A healthy family should allow a person to be an individual but also be connected. You should be able to have both. So if a parent is demanding of a child play a certain instrument or sport that the child doesn't want to do, the therapist will confront the family about where parenting ends and when the child can be who they want to be, which is great because that kind of stuff will carry on for all kinds of years, right? We'll see that like you need to be in this kind of profession. You need to pick this kind of partner. And we're given a lot of freedom to choose even from a spiritual perspective. Like God wants us to use our giftings and our talents to be who He created us to be, but there's a lot of choice in that too. And He's not telling us this is who you're going to be and this is who you are and you have no choice around it. Like we're given options and choices, but yet as parents, we can be very controlling in that way. So here are some things I touched on. I know there's so much more, very lightly touched on it, but hopefully it's helpful to give you some ideas and perspective. Um, and yeah, next week will be week 4, so we're almost halfway done with the course. It goes by very fast. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. Don't forget about that worksheet being on the announcements page. Have a fantastic week. I look forward to reading week 2's discussion boards. Thank you.